I want to bring to your notice and make you speak more about it, about our relationship with the European
Yeah,
countries
sure.
individually and the EU as well.
Yeah, sure. So that's a very, very useful question because a lot of this is kahani, but where really it impacts India is where we should be looking at. So very quickly, so there are a couple of things that the Europeans are doing. So their economy is not doing well, but you have to understand they are still like a 20 trillion economy.
Yeah.
So it's like a massive economy with massive investments, capabilities, etc. Very quickly, with respect to India, of course, you know the context that the geopolitical friction is now no longer there, but there is still a trust deficit which is there and which will take time, because Europeans have been condescending towards us,
Yeah.
and there's also a history of colonial past. And but then the Europeans say, but yeah, we didn't, not everybody in Europe colonized India, no. But anyway, so that's fine tuning. Anyway, so coming back, there are two things that are happening, frankly, or maybe let's say three things happening, not two. One is of course the economy, the economic sector. You know that India and the EU we already have a strategic comprehensive, partnership, comprehensive strategic partnership, and we are negotiating a free trade agreement. And India, in fact, the EU collectively is India's one of the biggest, trading
Trade
partners to
partners.
India.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and one of the things in which you understand that is like in the last 3 years, at the Raisina event, the annual Raisina event, the chief guest has been a European. So it's Ursula von der Leyen, and then Giorgia Meloni from Italy, and then Mitsotakis, the Greek prime minister. So it's been mostly them. That could still be symbolic, but I want to come to the main thing. So we have a great trade in goods and services, but we are negotiating an FTA. Now that FTA has been also under negotiation for a very long time. Part of the problem with the EU and why EU loses its competitive edge, and why other countries like China, for example, are sometimes much more, because they also have a dependency problem with China. You know why? Because the EU is extremely tightly regulated. It's a regulatory power.
True.
And what we tell to the Europeans is that, listen, with this kind of a structure, maybe you can work with other whatever transatlantic allies and all that. Okay, it wouldn't fly in Indo-Pacific. I mean, you coming to a country, you can't put your carbon border adjustment mechanism regulations on us. I mean, our industries are not ready for that. We don't look at, for example, climate change. I mean, we always complete our sustainable development goals, but we are not looking at carbon, phasing out of
Because we're
fossil
still
fuels.
developing, right?
We are developing, and
And
then it's
you
like it's
can't.
also common but differentiated responsibility, no. So yeah, we do understand we have to do things, but you can't be holding it against us because we are still developing, and you are the guys that really polluted everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, so what I'm saying is that we've been negotiating the FTA for a long time, but right now, and ever since it kind of relaunched in 2022, for many years the talks were stalled. So when the talks were relaunched in 2022, we kind of divided into three parts. So one is a free trade agreement, which is on trade and services, right? The other is a bilateral investment agreement, which is on bilateral investments from the EU, and the third is a treaty on geographical indicators. Okay, and now we are negotiating it separately. In my opinion, the FTA still has major problems because of all these carbon border adjustment mechanisms and all that, and also because they want us to open our markets, and we are still very sensitive to, dairy and agriculture remains very, very sensitive. So I don't see, in its current form, the FTA can't go through. I am of the opinion that we should be trying for a bilateral investment treaty, because we want the investments to help our economy mature. And we recently had our first free trade agreement with the developed world, with the EFTA countries. I don't know how many of you know EFTA countries. EFTA countries are the 4 countries that are not part of the European Union, and these 4 countries are Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein.
I see.
These 4 countries and India recently struck in March 2024. We have struck a free trade agreement where, under this free trade agreement, we have opened our markets. Okay, and in lieu of that, or in exchange of that, these 4 countries have promised 100 billion worth of investment in India over the
Nice.
next 15 years, and most of that investment is going to come from Norway and Switzerland, etc. Okay, now the argument is that if we can do it with 4 countries that don't belong to the EU customs union and all that, we can also do it with the EU, provided they are willing to be a little more resilient in their approach to climate and all that. But the EU has these problems. So economy is one. The other part where the EU does very, very well is actually the European Investment Bank, where you have all, by the way, I don't know how many of you know, most of the metros, the second generation metros made in India, they're not built by the Japanese. They're built by the Europeans. Most of these developmental projects are, but these guys, they do not know how to actually even take credit for that, okay? Because it's somehow they are not able to find a strategic value there, okay? So European Investment Bank does a lot of developmental work. We have great connectivity projects, okay, running and all that. So connectivity, investment, climate financing, that's one part, and economy, that's one part. The second part is the maritime area, where I would say the convergence is maximum, if you ask me.
Indo-Pacific?
Indo-Pacific, exactly.
And is it because of the rise of China in the
Absolutely,
Pacific?
absolutely. So 2019 was a watershed event in the EU, when they for the first time used a phrase for China in their written documents. And this was China is a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival. Okay, for the first time, because China was getting too much with its coercive economic statecraft and all that. Okay, they were trying to divide the EU, the East Europeans differently and the Europeans differently. They were also trying to do very mean things to Lithuania, for example, because Lithuania was trying to get cozier with Taiwan. So all that was happening. Also, the way the Chinese gave subsidies so that competitiveness got killed.
Yeah.
See, one of the reasons why the German car model,
EVs, no?
and the EVs, etc., they've completely failed, is because in Europe, the cost of making an electric vehicle, for example, is much more than it is in China.
3 times
because
what BYD is
China
selling.
gives subsidies, and China kills competition by that. And this has been a major point of contention every time. This also is one of the reasons, along with what China does to Xinjiang, and human rights abuses and all that, is why the EU-China free trade agreement is also stuck. Because they are like, this is unfair. I mean, how you can't be doing, you have to have a level playing field. So that's a big reason. Apart from that, there's also a fact that Europe is in relative decline because they did not invest so much in competitiveness. They were more interested in standards, they were more interested in regulation. Okay, that is why I was connecting that. But anyway, coming to the maritime region, because it's a very important vertical. The EU 2019 things changed when they called China a systemic rival, and then they also realized the dangers of what would happen to the sea lanes of communication, which are vital maritime routes for trade, if China was to change the status quo of the region unilaterally. They saw part of that happening in South China Sea, the Malacca Strait, the Sunda Strait, all these important sea lanes of communication go from that region. 40% of world trade goes from that region, yeah. And as a result, the response that you got from the EU was, they started publishing Indo-Pacific strategies.
Right.
Okay, France was the first country. France, of course, makes sense because France is a resident Indo-Pacific power. It has EEZ in the Indo-Pacific. It has 1.5 million people in the Indo-Pacific. Reunion Island, and all that.
Yeah.
So these are French territories. Okay. So France was the first one. Then EU followed. Germany followed. UK followed. UK, yeah, that's called integrated review, by the way. And during in 2023, the Rishi Sunak government, they also revised it, and they called it a revised integrated review. Lately, Czech Republic followed. The Netherlands followed. The most recent has been Sweden. Sweden has also come up with an Indo-Pacific strategy. Okay. Wow. And then, of course, this also came somewhere parallel to the development in the US, where Trump had shifted assets from CENTCOM to PACOM and renamed it Indo-Pacific Command. Okay, so all of that was, and why was all that happening? That was only happening because the world was really worried about what China has in mind and what happens to world trade if something goes wrong here. So don't be under the impression that every single European player that I just named has a completely similar view or an exactly similar view of the Indo-Pacific or what they wish to do with the Indo-Pacific. It's not like that. So France has a different view. Okay, Europeans are by and large, the view is the same. But like, for example, for the French, they also want to protect the civilians and the EEZ. For Germany, it's largely trade. For Sweden, it's largely to do with defense and actually getting raw materials and all that. Okay, so all of these have different reasons, right? The UK, for example, the integrated review, it's much more, in consonance with the US view. Okay, it's much more hawkish on China. The EU is not so hawkish. The EU believes more in multipolarity, and that is where it actually strikes a chord with India, because the India-EU maritime cooperation, we have a maritime dialogue, we have a maritime security dialogue, by the way. The EU has these operations Atalanta. I don't know if you've heard of that. These are the EU NAVFOR missions, the EU Naval Force missions. Okay, they also have coordinated maritime presence, which is another tool. What I'm trying to say is that when it comes to the Indo-Pacific region and the maritime, domain, you still have a lot of convergence between India and the EU. primarily because both these sides look at Indo-Pacific as a contested region, and both of them realize that there are dangers associated with escalation. Therefore, you should try to push for multipolarity. So multipolarity is what actually brings the EU and India and the different European countries, with an exception of UK, because UK mirrors the US approach more and is more hawkish on China. So maritime, domain is a very, very important domain. In fact, India has been on board with Operation Atalanta, the earlier one, and then the Operation Aspidus, which is a very recent one, which is right now under the Greek command, and then the Coordinated Maritime Presence. And frankly, if you ask me, this is a region where the two sides can really make things work, because the EU doesn't believe in militarization. They don't have capabilities. No, the EU doesn't have capabilities, and member states only. So they can really do wonders when it comes to tackling hybrid threats, because the EU in Finland, in Helsinki, they have a center of excellence for hybrid threats. Okay, so they have a lot of experience with hybrid threats. In the Indo-Pacific, they can really get into bolstering the maritime domain capabilities. And if you see the Indo-Pacific theater, you know that there is no NATO in Indo-Pacific. Okay, there are different geometries. There are quadrilaterals. There are different plurilaterals. There are trilaterals. Okay, so this is a region where India and the EU has also several other tools, like for example, something called a CRIMARIO, which is the critical maritime route security. That kind of a thing. They basically talk about how to secure critical maritime routes, etc. They're looking at hybrid threats. They're looking at how to counter disinformation, how to counter terrorism, how to counter all these critical and emerging challenges. Okay, and because they come with so much experience, this is a region where they can really do a lot with developing tools to exchange maritime domain awareness, something that the Quad is also interested in, by the way. Okay, but the question is, the challenge is, how do you do it in a real time fashion? Because it's not just about collecting information and sharing it with others. The point is that if you want to understand hybrid threats, you have to do a real time linking of how you're looking at something, right? And that real time linking requires a lot of other trust, a lot of other issues as well. And basically you have to use common portals, right? You can't be using different portals. But at the same time, that is a region where I feel that also the sheer conception of for example, the 7 pillars of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy and the 7 pillars of India's Indo-Pacific strategy are very similar. Okay, so of course the Quad remains the major tool with which India engages the Indo-Pacific, but then there are also this convergence with EU, the second one. The third one is the defense industry base that they are now developing. Okay, and I have argued that there is a lot of potential for India, because like I said, that the American military industrial complex and the European military industrial complex is under a lot of pressure. So what the EU defense industry strategy does, and it's been released in 2024, so it's very recent. What it does is that it says that fine, it incentivizes common purchases, okay, among member states. And India is already exporting to a lot of European countries. Like we have good export to France, good export to Poland, good export to Italy, but it's still fragmented. So the argument is that if we can get the three countries together and they can place common orders, it gets incentivized. It is financially more viable for us as well as for the EU. But the problem is that because EU remains a regulatory power, it has to develop pathways कि हर चीज लिखा पढ़ी में साफ होनी चाहिए, and that sometimes comes in the way of EU. And if you remember, very recently they came up with something called a Draghi report. Mario Draghi was Italian Prime Minister some time ago, before Giorgia Meloni. And the Draghi report says very, very clearly, you have to loosen up your regulatory stringence, okay, if you really want to remain competitive. And you have to allow, for example, if you think that every single 27 member state is going to be on board on something, that is not going to fly. You have to allow for mechanisms where 3 or 4 countries can come together and do something which is important. That is how you will be able to catch up with time. So from India's perspective, these are the 3 distinct areas where we are engaging with the EU. And the economy, of course, is very obvious. I gave you details. I also gave you why the non-EU countries we have struck a deal with them. In maritime, of course, that in my opinion remains the most fertile ground for cooperation. And then the third is the evolving European defense industrial base, where I feel, because South Korea is already doing that. South Korea has already pitched in. South Korea is taking care of a lot of their orders. If South Korea can, if India can send so much of defense export to the US, why not to the EU? True.
Yeah. I'm listening to you. There's so hopefulness for the future of India's geopolitics. And I mean, there's so much wealth of knowledge and reservoir with you in terms of so much understanding of geopolitics. There can be about 10 podcasts with you and still there'll be so many questions yet.
But we still have not discussed what are the problems. There are certain problems also. And if you just allow me, the couple of things that we really need to address when it comes to Europe is that India and Europeans both, and in that sense, the Ukraine war has been an enabler of conversations. Okay, that when it started, if you remember what Dr. Jaishankar said, he said that Europe has to come out of the mindset that Europe's problems are world problems and world's problems are not Europe's problems.
True.
So that condescending nature of being, of that white man's burden of always trying to tell the others what to do. Okay, France doesn't do it, and that's why we have special relations with France, but a lot of other countries do it. Now you see a change in that. Okay, so somewhere you do see that there are these elements of change which are very, very palpable because the shared convergence is very high. But it's not to say that everything is hunky-dory. Like today, if the European Union itself or the different member states are not able to put their act together and really rise up to the occasion, right? I mean, they are going to be dysfunctional for a very, very long time because the kind of challenges that they face are so many. So from India's perspective, and that is the reason why India also keeps its options open, that India wouldn't like to be told by a certain country what kind of a foreign policy to have for another country. But at the same time, India is absolutely mature enough to actually, capitalize on the leverage that that country gives us. And that's somewhere the core of our multi-alignment. But at the same time, just the last thing, Shivam, is that we keep talking about multi-alignment, but even for India's multi-alignment, I have something to say, which is that India's multi-alignment is not an equal distribution. So just because we say that we are multi-aligned doesn't mean that we are equidistant from every single world power out there.
Right.
Okay. I mean, there are certain countries with whom our strategic partnerships are much more important than the others. These are the strategic partnerships which are actually going to catapult us into the next domain. And one of the reasons I just told you was the emerging global digital order, and that is why the new age defense industry relationships of India are also complemented by a strong convergence on technological matters. So those things are important, and by far, if you ask me to compare between the EU and the US, I would say the US is a more important strategic partner to
Definitely.
India, and that there is a reason why Raksha Mantri said that India-US strategic partnership is going to be most crucial in stabilizing the world security situation,
Right.
because the kind of that is something which is very, very astounding. But just a little bit of a fine tuning, and it's interesting to note that even with the US, we don't want to put all our eggs in the same basket, and that's where the Europeans fit in. Okay, because the Europeans and the EU and the US, we tend to sort of look at them as monoliths, right? That it's the collective West. Oh no, there is a huge difference in how they look at the world, how they look at India, how they look at their strategic interest, how they look at each other. Okay, so from India's perspective, that is also India's diversification at play, whether it's the US or whether it's the EU or whether it's Japan or Israel or Australia or UAE or Russia.
That's where our strategic autonomy comes into picture.
That's where our strategic autonomy comes. But just the thing is that we are still not equidistant with all that. So some are more important than the others.
Yeah, we got to balance that. Diary of a Publisher. Here we don't just talk, we explore, question, and push beyond the ordinary. And if you're ready to see things from a fresh perspective, you're at the right place. Make sure to subscribe. We're just scratching the surface, and the next conversation might just change how you see the world.